Hey, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Private Lenders Podcast. Chris and Jason here. Going to dive right in. We were talking about a conversation I had very recently with the guy who invests with us. And he was telling me about how he's been bringing his son into the business. And mind you, this guy has been a very successful real estate investor and developer over the years. He's been buying multifamily. He also owns shopping centers anchored by grocery stores, like big stuff, good stuff. He's done very, very well over the years. And he's seen a number of different market cycles. He started buying in the 80s, right? And we got into this conversation, and it kind of spilled over to a conversation Jason and I were having about how so many people in the current real estate market have only seen the current real estate market. And that applies to lenders, to investors. A lot of people in the space now have only been around like for 10 years or so. Right. And that's okay. You are what age you are. Like, you get into business when you do. And but the point is, not everyone's seen real changing markets and different interest rate environments and how this can affect all of the business so much, lending, buying, everything.
Yeah. And I'll give you a little secret. Not everything goes up. Real estate prices do not continue to go up forever on the residential side, on the commercial side. And I know people don't think that, but sometimes private lending underwriting, real estate investors we know that are buying stuff, they're continuing to buy stuff at numbers that if this thing doesn't appreciate substantially, you're screwed. Like, you're going to lose. I was thinking about it. So when, early on, Chris and I were in we're in the real estate investing space, not lending, but in the, or not lending at scale, but in the real estate investing space, pre 2007, early 2000s to 2007. So we saw stuff go up, we saw stuff come down, we saw stuff gradually go back up to where we're at today. And I remember back in the day, 2007, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, we were at like 15. We were lending out at 15% and 5 points. That was the going rate because there was very little liquidity there.
At the time, I think that was historically the private money rate.
That's right. Exactly. Historically, it was that, maybe even higher. Some people were at 18 and 8. I remember 16 and 6, things like that. But it's funny looking back because you have to adjust your underwriting and you have to adjust just your whole game plan and your business model based on what's going on in the market, supply and demand of capital, supply and demand of properties, risk tolerance, things like that, cap rates. And I remember we were doing deals for people at 15% and 5 points. People were buying properties for $200,000 and literally reselling them the next day for $300,000, right? There's foreclosure booms. They're buying properties at super low numbers. They didn't care what our rates were. That it didn't, and like we were comfortable giving a very high leverage back in the day in order to do so as well, because literally it was like they bought this property off MLS, maybe even on MLS, for $200,000, and it was like, wait a second, you could sell this thing tomorrow for $300,000, and they were selling it with a little bit of elbow grease and things like that, and it was wild. And we went for years and years and years that was like that, and a lot of these real estate investors kind of got lazy. Like right now, you're not going on MLS to buy this like bargain property. It just doesn't exist. Back then, you could do so, right? Mm-hmm. This day and age, you got to do, and so many investors are going to fall out of the game. Real estate investors are going to fall out of the game right now because they don't want to do the heavy lifting. They don't want to do abandoned signs. They don't want to do direct mail. They don't want to do PPC. They don't want to go door to door. They, hey, my real estate agent found me a deal. I'm going to put some money into it and I'm going to sell it and make a profit. Like, that's called flipping, right? That's where like the masses come into the game when they're able to do that. And then they're able to get the highest leverage possible from a bank, an institution, a hard money lender, a private lender, when they don't even need much of their own skin in the game. Like, that's the sweet spot for a lot of these real estate investors, right? You can find a property on MLS, you can get 100% leverage, and you can make a profit no matter what. Anyone can do it, right? And that did work for a period of time, but those days are over, and it doesn't work like that. And that's okay. It's okay that those days are over. When those days are over, it's a good thing, because guess what? 90% of the lenders, real estate investors, guys that think they know how to do things, real estate agents, real estate appraisers, real estate mortgage brokers, they all fall out, right? And it's
Right.
not like this cutthroat, only the strong will survive. It's the real business owners and operators will survive. That's what it gets to. And the notion of this market, a market cycle is a cycle, right? It's not up, 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 and away, right? Like it doesn't work like that.
Yeah. I mean, when things change, it always comes back to fundamentals. Like fundamentals of loan to value when you're a lender is an important one, right? DSCR, similar kinds of stuff when you're a buyer, a real estate investor. If you're going to buy income property, it has to cash flow. Like it sounds silly to say that, but it's actually the case where people who have been in the game say, you know, uh, 2015 to 2022, they didn't necessarily have to do that. And of course, that's in hindsight. And a lot of people were buying that way. For example, buying rental properties, even if you're talking about single family, that legitimately didn't cash flow. It would be like a break even property. And they did well on the appreciation because of market timing. So when that changes and you're not going to have that, property being worth 100K more just by doing nothing within a few years, all of a sudden it comes back to fundamentals and you have to buy properties at prices where that NOI, that bottom line profit on that property has to be worthwhile in and of itself. Can't assume any appreciation on it. And if you're buying like that, you're buying right. And, same with lenders too. Like we saw some lenders do some silly stuff in that same kind of time frame where they were giving so much leverage on a property that it had to appreciate. It's not how lender fundamentals work. Like you're talking about even more conservative than today's value. Like you need to lend at this property can depreciate a bit, 10%, hopefully not 20, and we're going to get out clean as a first mortgage lender. Those are fundamentals, right? Like you can't be banking on, okay, well, by the time this borrower finishes this giant rehab project in a year, it's going to be worth 100K more. Like you legitimately cannot lend like that. You're going to lose your ass.
Yeah. I mean, keep in mind, and I know folks might disagree with this, but in all honesty, it's the truth. Over the last 4 years, 3 to 5 years, real estate investors were paying $100,000 for a property. We're paying $120,000 for a property that was worth $100,000, right? They were overpaying for it because, hey, in the long run, they could have. Number one, it was supply and demand. It was the only way they could get their hands on a deal. They had to pay above investor retail today, but they were able to sell it for above retail tomorrow, homeowner retail tomorrow, right? They were buying properties. Let's say they're worth $200,000. They're like the fundamental that Chris is talking about is a real estate investor should be buying a property at 65 cents on the dollar minus construction costs, right? So if they buy it for 100, they put 30 into it, it should be worth 200 grand, right? That's typically the metrics. And over the last 10 or plus years, it's okay, well, instead of 65% minus construction costs, I'll do 70 cents or 75 or 80 or 85 or 90. And I'm just going to work on skinnier margins. And that's where things get tricky, right? That was always the model. We learned real estate investing 20 plus years ago, 65 cents on the dollar minus construction costs. Same thing as lending, right? 65, you're lending 65% minus the construction costs. And essence ends up being the same thing. But investors were paying, too much for the stuff on the front end. And then the only reason they made it back on the back end was because it was selling for above market values, right? They went into it at, hey, 200,000 was the last sold comp. This one's going to sell at 210, then 220, then 230, then 240, then 250. And it continued to do so, but those days are over. It's not continuing to do so already, right? So that's the real estate investor. On the lender, you need to be diligent to make sure, number one, your day one value is always good. You cannot give somebody 100% financing, especially on just the purchase money only price, right? If somebody buys something for $100,000 today, right? Typically, I'm not saying that they can't find a property for 100 grand that's not worth a little bit more. I get it. It could potentially be worth a little bit more. But if you lend somebody at $100,000 that's worth 100 a day or 110 or 120 a day, you are losing principal. You're not just losing interest or fees. You're losing money, right? By the time you get that property back, if they default, your exposure foreclosure costs, potentially coming in to cover their taxes, legal bills, potentially coming in to cover their insurance, all miscellaneous stuff, deferred maintenance. That property is going to go back down in value if they default because they're walking away from it. And there's going to be vandalism. There's going to be damage, other work that might need to still be done with it. You're losing money on that thing. So you need to make sure your day one value is good. Your after repair value is good. Make sure these borrowers are bringing real cash to the table, right? You don't want to be caught, in a market cycle. I mean, the one interesting thing right now is the market really hasn't seemed to be all that affected, at least in the 6 markets, the 6 states that we lend in, but it's softened a little bit, but nothing major has happened. Maybe it happens. Maybe it doesn't happen. Maybe this is the warning of like, hey, we're in a time right now that there's not much liquidity on there. So it's great to be a private lender, but I also have to be careful because I want to make sure there's exit strategies for my borrowers and that banks can refinance my borrowers or pay off my loan when the next homeowner buys the property from my flipper. So maybe this is a warning of like, hey, things are a little bit soft right now. It's not the time to be aggressive and try to fight for borrowers and try to give them very, very high leverage. Make sure they're bringing 20, 30+% down onto your deals. Yeah.
And another quick note on that, when having conversations with borrowers and they say that, yeah, I'm buying this property for 100 and it's really worth 150. And what Jason's always said to people is, well, why even rehab it? Just sell it now. Just sell it as is. Wholesale it. Do whatever. Yeah. Like why do all the work if it truly is worth that much compared to what you're paying for it?
Yeah. Yeah. Real quick on that topic, and then you can, and if they say that, I typically like, okay, well, what's the after repair value? What's your construction numbers? Okay. Would you rather $50,000 now or $60,000, hopefully best case scenario later? Like they'll just walk themselves into the trap. And I get it. People do get, discounted properties. I'm not saying you can't buy a property at a discount, but use common sense and do the math to see if the whole equation makes sense.
Yeah. So moral of the story today, guys, is think about what market cycles that you've seen. And if you've only seen the current one going back to maybe 2010, take that into account, right? Because it's not always like that. And just the timing of when we started, like Jason began with before, is that we came in a hot market in 2002 or 3 to 2006. Things were crazy, even crazier than recently. It was like that boom time was wild across all of residential real estate. And then it busted real hard. Subprime crisis, foreclosure boom, everything else. And that was, we were 5 or 6 years into the game, right into a super down market. And then it started creeping back up, and then it's been moving back up ever since. And we've been watching it. And so we do have the benefit of having seen that early on market cycle and what things look like on the way down. So just be mindful of it. Take that into account in your underwriting and your own parameters, right? Your own fundamentals of how you look at deals and what could potentially happen in the future. Keep a safe portfolio, and we will see you guys here next time on the Private Lenders Podcast.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast. Please note that the opinions stated by all the speakers on this show are only opinions and not intended for legal, financial, or accounting advice. Please make sure to always check with your own legal, accounting, and financial professionals. If you enjoyed this episode of the Private Lenders Podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would spread the word. Make sure to check out hardmoneymastermind.com, the #1 free community for new and experienced private and hard money lenders.